My name's Stephen Hand. I'm one of the founding instructors at the Staccato School of Defence in Sydney and Hobart, Australia. I've been studying the works of George Silver, the English gentleman who wrote in the late 16th and early 17th century, for about 25 years now. We know what George Silver said. We've got facsimiles of his manuals. That's his first work, Paradoxes of Defence, published in 1599. And we also have his later work, unpublished, probably written about 1605, Brief Instructions upon my Paradoxes of Defence. George Silver was an Elizabethan gentleman. Now, a gentleman was a person who had enough money that he didn't have to work. George Silver wasn't a fencing master, and in fact the fencing masters were very well down the social scale from somebody like George. He was an amateur writer, and he was writing because he didn't like the new Italian rapier, and he didn't like its introduction and what he thought it was doing to English swordsmanship. This is the sort of sword that George Silver taught. It's an English basket-hilted backsword. It's called a backsword because it has a back, it has a single edge for most of its length. It has a basket hilt. Now, Silver talks very much about the antiquity of his system, how it's the great old system that made England great, allowed them to win at Agincourt, etc., etc. But there are elements of his system that are impossible without a basket. He parries very close to the hilt, and he says that you can't be sure within 2 or 3 inches where a blow will land. Right? Obviously, if you've got a basket, 2 or 3 inches, you're still safe. If you don't have a basket, you have to fight in a very different way. So what makes a good sword? Well, this is an example of an English basket-hilted sword from around 1580, 1590. So when Silver was fencing and writing. It's a back sword, as I said, with a back. It has a good broad blade, quite thin at the end, good solid basket without too many gaps that you can get through. Weighs a touch under 3 pounds, about 1.3 kilos, nice and light and whippy. This is a different style of sword. This is an English mortuary sword, very classic design, used in England for quite a number of years. Again, very thin near the end, quite a broad blade. This is again a backsword blade. This is a sword that's not so appropriate for use with Silver. It's a Scottish basket-hilted sword, which a lot of people think of when they think basket hilts. As you can see, it's a lot shorter than Silver's sword, and these were used in a slightly different way to the way Silver used his sword. If we compare that with the next sword, we can see the difference in length. This sword's actually a 400-year-old original. This is a Venetian Schiavona. Probably unlikely to have been used in Silver's style, but it's very much the sort of sword that you can do this system with. All right, again, very, very almost paper thin at the end. All right, very nice sword. You don't always want to start with a steel sword, so I want to look at some of the options you can use. This is a Japanese shinai, which has got a basket on it. It's quite a good training tool. Recently, we've been replacing shinai as training swords with these purpose-built plastic swords, which are quite good. They behave quite like a sword, and they're quite reasonably priced. Moving on to protective equipment. You should always use a fencing mask, or failing that, some sort of fencing helmet, such as this one I've had custom made. You always need to have a box. Gauntlets are vital. One of the primary targets in George Silver's system is the sword arm. You always need a vambrace. This is an example that I've made based on a surviving original. You can obviously have ones that are quite a bit simpler than this. A gorget is necessary to protect the neck. Over the top of your gauntlet, fitting inside the basket, it's good to have a half gauntlet, just to avoid those little attacks that might come around the wrist. And finally, you want some sort of fencing jacket. Now this is just a modern commercial fencing instructor's jacket. There are quite a few good jackets that are available out there these days. George Silver's stance is very centre weighted. We'll start with the left leg forward. I'm right-handed. If you're left-handed, just reverse everything you're going to see. My stance is centred, weight between the legs. I'm sitting down a little bit into my stance. My weight's dropped. My knees are bent. My right hand is going to have a sword in it, so we'll ignore that for the moment. My left hand wants to be tucked into my chest with my thumb against the breastbone. The left hand is the grappling hand. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So whenever we move from this stance, we want to start moving from the centre of the body. We don't want to start moving with the legs, we don't want to start moving with the head, because that will tip us forward or backwards. We want to start moving with the body from the core. So we can move in two basic ways. We can do steps where the feet don't cross, or we can do passes where the feet do cross. I'll start with a step forward. I start moving the body forward, lift up my front foot, bring it forward, and bring up my back foot. So, like so. To do a step backwards, I simply reverse the process. I start moving my body weight back. As I feel my weight start to go over the back leg, I'll lift my back foot up, take a step back with that and a step back with the front foot. I'm always in silver widening my stance and then narrowing it. I never want to narrow my stance and then widen it. If I do that, all of a sudden I've got a narrow base here and I can be knocked over. I always want to widen, narrow, widen, narrow. If I step to the right, I go with the right foot, widen my stance, then narrow it back to my basic shoulder width apart. Left, widen, narrow. Okay, so once again, step forward, step backwards, step to the right, step to the left. If we want to do variations in between those four movements, if I want to step forward and left, I'll go with the front foot, back and right, go with the back foot. If I want to step forward and right, if I'm going more right than forward, I'll go with the right foot. If I'm going more forward than right, I'll go with the front foot. Always widen and narrow. Similarly, if I'm going back and left, if I'm going more back, I'll go with the back foot. If I'm going more sideways, I'll go with the left foot. Always widen and then narrow. The other basic way to move is passes. A pass is where one foot moves past the other, as in a normal walking motion. Again, I shift the weight. As the weight comes over the front foot, I just change my stance. Note how my stationary foot rotated only as my weight came over it. Now going back is a little more complicated. I've got to again move my weight over the stationary foot, but this time I've got to move it back and a little bit left because I want to pivot on the ball of the foot. So I move my weight back and a little bit left over the ball of the foot and go back, again pivoting as my weight goes over it. So I pass forward and moving the weight back and a little bit left, I pass back. If I swap the stance, I can do all of it right leg forward. I can step forward, step back, step to the right, step to the left. I can pass forward, And now, moving my weight over the ball of my foot back and a little bit right, I can pass back. So once again, step forward, step back, step to the right, step to the left, pass forward, pass back. You should have noticed in the movements that I was doing that I didn't cross the heels. It's very important not to cross the heels in Silver's system. When you're moving forward and right from a left leg forward stance, there's a tendency to cross the heels, but if you just allow that back heel to rotate a little bit, you notice now the heels aren't actually crossed. Whenever you cross the heels, you get an imbalance. It's almost like you're walking on a tightrope. So try really hard never to let your heels cross, whatever you do. All right, a little bit on how to hold the sword. I'm doing this with the mortuary hilt because it's got a nice open hilt and it's easy to show how I'm holding it. There's two basic ways to hold the sword. You can hold it with the hand right up on the hilt in what's sometimes called a hammer grip, and you can loosen your hand just a little bit in what's sometimes called a handshake grip. And you should be able to go between those two grips quite readily. If I move into some of the guards, in this guard I'm in a hammer grip. I move up again, I'm still in a hammer grip. But if I go into one of the other main guards, I immediately go up into a handshake grip. I've got a lot looser grip. The moment I start attacking, I come down into a hammer grip, and the moment that my sword is going to make contact, I want it to be in that tight hammer grip. I need to be able to sort of move from loose to tight quite readily. I'm loose, handshake, tight hammer, and I'll go loose again, and at the moment of contact I'll be tight. So you need to be able to change from this hammer grip into this handshake grip and back again. We need to be able to loosen and tighten the thumb and forefinger and just let our grip change from that hammer to handshake and back again. Weapon length. Silver talks about weapons being of a perfect length. He has an illustration in Paradoxes of Defence where he's standing with a dagger in his outstretched hand and he's got his sword like so, and he's able to easily pass his point within the outstretched dagger. What this means is that if you're in close and you're grappling or you've crossed swords, you can easily get the sword point back and put it into your opponent. Any longer and you're going to have difficulty doing this. Any shorter and you're going to give up a reach advantage to your opponent. Silver has a number of guard positions, although the word guard comes from Italian and wasn't in the English language at this period. Silver uses the terms fight, ward and lying to describe the positions he wants you to hold the sword in. Now, a fight is something where you can do a range of actions, both offensive and defensive. A ward is something where you're actually parrying somebody's attack, preventing them from hitting you. And a lying, it's like lying in wait. You're waiting for someone to come to you. It's basically a defensive position. The first of his positions is called open fight. Open fight is the main attacking position. From here, I can launch attacks in any direction. The sword is at the top of an arc, ready to come down in any sort of attack. I can attack in any angle. Like so. Silver says that you can hold open fight with the point straight up or a little back. So here I'm in a handshake grip, here I go back into a hammer grip. Different people like different grips, and Silver isn't too fussed which one you like. Pick the one you like and stick with it. In contrast, the next position, Gardent fight, specifically true Gardent, Silver's very explicit about exactly how you should hold your sword. The hilt should be, the middle of the hilt should be directly above the head. If I draw a line down from the middle of the hilt, it's down the middle of my face. It's well out, about a foot in front of my head. The blade is angled back towards my left knee. Silver's very, very explicit about exactly how to hold this guard and says that you get into all sorts of trouble if you don't hold it just so. From here, you can make all sorts of defences. You're obviously guarded in this line. You're open in this line, but you know you're open, so that's an invitation. The third of the fights is close fight. Close fight is where you're close enough to cross your opponent's weapon or parry. This is called forehand ward with the point up. Forehand ward can be formed on the outside, this side of your body, or the inside. Note that the point hasn't really moved. So inside, outside. Inside forehand, outside forehand. Now if I drop the point, I'm now in what's called bastard Gardent ward. I'm parrying a cut, low cut to the outside, and I'm now parrying a cut to the inside. Unlike true Gardent, where I'm looking under the sword arm, in bastard Gardent I'm looking over the sword arm. There should never be a time when I'm trying to look through my sword arm, because obviously that doesn't work. The fourth of the fights is variable fight. The main position in variable fight is staccata. It's the position from which you can do a straight thrust or a staccata. If I pass back, I'm now in passata, all right, where I have to pass forward to do a thrusting attack. Staccata, passata. There are two other positions that aren't very much used in this. There is imbricata and there is mountanta. Imbricata and mountanta. I tend to teach staccata first and foremost. I find it the most useful of the lyings of variable fight. The arm should be straight, just the way it is when you're walking down the street. Just like put the sword into your hand as it's hanging down in the natural position, and the point should be up a little bit so that if it travels forward, it goes towards the throat or face of the opponent. So once more, looking at our positions. Open fight. Silver says you can hold this straight up or a little back, whichever is easiest. Don't get too fussed about the way you hold this. Gardent fight. Now, Gardent fight has to be held just so. If I turn around to the side, you can see the hand is in front of the body, the point is angled back towards the left knee. Silver's very explicit, you have to hold this position just so, or you get into all sorts of problems. Close fight, you're warding or parrying attacks, forehand to the outside, forehand to the inside, bastard Gardent to the outside, bastard Gardent to the inside. Variable fight, lying in wait, staccata, passata, imbricata, mountanta. We're now going to transition between the different fights, wards and lyings. I'll start in open fight. If I pass forward, I go into staccata. If I pass back, I'm in passata. I can pass forward into imbricata, mountanta, drop into forehand, bastard Gardent. Often bastard Gardent on the outside is better when you're left leg forward, and on the inside when you're right leg forward. True Gardent can be formed either leg forward. It should always be just outside the left shoulder. Now, the most difficult guard transition is the one where we move from open to true guardant. There's a tendency to just let your blade slip down. If someone's attacking you, you're going to drag their blade into your own head. At best, your blade's going to be travelling towards your head when you actually want to oppose what they're doing. So the way to do it is we drop the sword until the hilt is at about eye level. We turn the hand in and we pass forward underneath the guard. So we drop, roll, and come underneath our true guardant. Before I start to talk about attacks, look down at my feet. Now, you'll notice that my foot is pointing direct towards you. Where your toe points is where your sword naturally wants to go. So if you want your sword to go towards your opponent, point your toe towards him, whether your left leg forward or right leg forward. The toe still points towards the centre of body mass of the opponent. Silver talks about 4 actions, 4 parts of the attack. These are called bent, spent, lying spent, and drawing back. Bent is like being coiled up like a spring, ready to release your energy. So I'm in open fight, which is Silver's main attacking guard, and I'm ready to attack. I'm bent. As my sword comes forward, it gets to the point where it's going to hit the opponent. That's called spent. So at that point there, I'm spent. I've spent my energy. Now it's not quite that simple because I could stop it at that point, although it requires a lot of muscular energy. It makes my body lurch in a very unpleasant way. It's much better to allow my sword to transition through to another guard position. And here I'm what Silver calls lying spent. I've expended the energy and now I'm getting ready to do something else. The final part of the action is drawing back. So we're going back to another guard position or doing another action. That's drawing back. So I can go back into the original guard position. So, bent, spent, lying spent, and drawing back. And for a sword like this, a basket-hooded sword that weighs close to 3 pounds and is only used in one hand, the time that you're lying spent is greater than for most other weapons. For a two-handed sword, it's a little bit heavier, but you've got 2 hands on the weapon, so you have less time lying spent. Every weapon has time lying spent, but it's more for this one. So it's an important part of the fight. When you make an attack, you should naturally end up in a very stable position, which is very conducive to pushing force through your opponent. So that's the end of my attack. Now if Marius puts his hands on me and starts to push me, you can see that although not a single one of my joints is locked, I'm actually in a really stable position and I don't have to put much effort into stopping him pushing me. If I sort of change my position a little bit, it doesn't look like I've changed it. Oh, that's horrible. Okay? Whereas again, if I attack properly, I should be almost unmovable. And he's stronger than me. So it's all about getting the body in line so that you can deliver force through there. And that also allows you to control your action. Silver's basic attacks are cuts. He says that no fight is complete without both blow and thrust. But most of his opening attacks that he describes are cuts, and thrusts are used in close when the action gets to that position. Cuts are generally made from open fight. Silver doesn't name his cuts with the exception of the downright blow that comes from right to left. So at my school we tend to use the Italian names. A vertical blow, which the Italians would call fendente. The cut must be done in a specific way. Silver says to move the hand forward first. I move the hand forward and I'll leave the point pretty much where it started. Then I move the point forward and my body at the same time, and the sword and my foot land at the same moment. Although normally, if I didn't actually strike an opponent, I would let my sword cut through. The next attack, Silver calls a downright blow. The Italians would call it a mandrita, coming from the right, and squalembrato, diagonally downward. Note how again the hand is coming forward and then the blade and the body are coming through. Don't drop the shoulder at the end of the attack. You want to keep your body upright. If we attack from the other side, Silver doesn't have a name for this cut. The Italians would call it reverso squalembrato. If you want to stay English, you could call it a reverse downright blow. The next attack comes again from the right. Silver would call this a downright blow to the body. The Italians would call it a mandrita tondo. And the last of the major attacks comes from the other side, a reverse attack to the body. The Italians would call this a reverso tondo. Timing and distance are two critical elements of Silver's fight. Let's start with distance. Silver describes two distances. The first distance, which is literally the first distance, the distance you start a fight in, and within distance. The first distance is a distance at which you can't reach the person with your sword even if you lean extravagantly. You've got to move in to hit them. Within distance is anything where you can strike the person by extending the sword or by leaning in. You don't have to move the feet. So in the course of a fight, you start at the first distance and you move within distance. Let's move on to the concept of tempo, time. Time in fencing comes in little packets. And this is the concept that Aristotle came up with, and it's still used in fencing to the modern day. Every action takes place in a packet of time called a tempo. We can have lots of different times. We can have tempos that are longer and shorter than each other. Silver describes 8 times, 4 of which we're really going to focus on because they're what Silver calls the true times. And the true times are what you should use. These are matched by the false times which you shouldn't use. A true time is defined by the fact that you create a threat to your opponent before you create a target. And the way you do that is you move your hand forward and create a threat with your weapon. Move your hand forward to create a threat with the weapon. Okay? Now, there are 4 true times and these are related to distance. If I'm close, then I can strike in the time of the hand. I simply extend my sword. The only bit of my body I need to move is my hand. That's the quickest of the true times. If I'm a little bit further out, extending my hand's really quick, but it's not going to let me reach my opponent. So I have to use the second true time a little bit slower, hand and body. All right, so I extend my hand and I move my body forward. I don't lean at the waist, I just sway forward, right, and keep my body upright. If I'm a bit further out, even if I do an extravagant lean, I can't reach my opponent. So I need to use the third true time, hand, body and foot. We move in that order, hand, body and foot. And that allows me to reach my opponent. Right? Most fencing takes place, whether it be sport fencing where we lunge, hand, body and foot. And finally we have the fourth true time, which is the time of hand, body and feet. If I'm too far away to reach even on the most extravagant pass, I can still hit by moving my feet 2 or more times as I come in. Attacking in the time of the hand, body and feet is really difficult because it's very easy to make a forward movement, make a step, and then move your body in. And this is the epitome of what's called creating a false time. A false time is where you create a target before you create a threat. You move your body towards the opponent so that it can be struck before you're creating a threat that they have to deal with. So a false time would be something like this. Right? Or this, the sort of thing you often see on movies. Here I come, here's my body, hit me. So, really important to remember, always lead with the hand, create a threat that the opponent has to deal with, whether it be first true time, second true time, third true time, or fourth true time. We've talked a bit about time and distance. Now, one of the corollaries of this is that, as the contemporary master Salvatore Fabris said, outside distance, time does not exist. If I'm outside of the first distance, if I can't reach my opponent and he can't reach me in one movement, I can pretty much do what I want and it doesn't matter. Once I get close enough so that I can reach my opponent with one foot movement, whatever that may be, then I have to start being careful. I'm now in the first distance, my opponent can reach me in one movement and I have to start taking what he's doing seriously. We've talked about the 4 true times. Now the 4 true times aren't the same length. Time of the hand is quicker than time of the hand, body and foot, and this can be used to intercept incoming attacks. So if somebody attacks using the 3rd or 4th true times, the slower true times, you can use one of the quicker true times, usually time of the hand, and strike them as they're coming in. So here's an example. So what's happened there is that as Lewis has attacked me in the time of the hand, body and foot, I've stood my ground and I've used time of the hand to strike him in the arm, and then I've moved out of distance. So I've used a counterattack in a shorter true time to intercept his longer true time. Now, how do you close distance? How do you move from the first distance to within distance? You obviously can't just walk in, right? If I try and just walk in, we'll do that again. If I try and just walk in, I get a fairly predictable response. So what I need to do is I need to use one of the longer true times, either time of the hand, body and foot, or time of the hand, body and feet, in order to come from the first distance to within distance, in order to close distance with my opponents. There are 2 basic ways you can defend yourself in fencing. You can counterattack, or you can parry. A counterattack is an attack that you make as the other person's attacking you, and a parry is where you put your sword in the way of the other person's attack, and then you will riposte, which means to do your own attack after you've parried. So I'll give you an example. If Marius attacks me, I can either counterattack. So in this case, I've struck to his arm and then got out of the way to make sure that if I haven't disabled him, he can't get me. I'll show that one again. So as Marius comes in, I strike his arm and immediately get out of the way in case what I've done hasn't injured him enough to make him stop. Or I can parry. Now when I parry, it's really important to parry as close to the hilt as possible, right up on the forte or the strong of the sword, and with the edge. If you parry further down, you've got less leverage. Marius isn't going to attack as hard as he possibly can, but I've got less leverage. The further we get towards the point, the less leverage I have. So I want to parry as close up here as possible. I also want to parry with the edge. If I parry with the edge, all the bones of my arm and the strength of the sword is in the same line. If I turn the flat around, my arm's not in alignment. So if Marius attacks even quite lightly and I parry with the flat, it's horrible. There are some cases where you want to deflect the sword where parrying with the flat's okay, but if you want to stop it, you need to parry with the edge as close to the hilt as possible. Silver describes 3 actions that you can use against an attack. The first is to strike or thrust at him at that instant when he hath gained you the place by his coming in. The second is to ward, and after to strike or thrust from that, remembering your governors. The third is to slip a little back and to strike or thrust after him. The first and third of these actions are both counterattacks. The first one is when you counterattack as your opponent's coming in before he's expecting to hit you. The third one, you let your opponent finish his action, you've gone back out of distance, and you strike as he's completing his action or has just completed his action. The second of the 3 actions is a parry or riposte. You parry the person's attack with your sword and then you riposte after that parry. I'm now going to show you some examples of the 3 actions. I'm going to do the same attack against the same fight, true guard fight. Marius is going to attack me with a downright blow, and I'm going to use the 3 actions. Firstly, I'm going to attack him as he comes in. Secondly, I'll parry and riposte. And thirdly, I'll attack as he's finishing his action. Just do it a bit quicker. And again. Now the parry riposte. And now the slip back. Another of Silver's basic concepts is of what he calls the 4 offensive actions. These are 4 ways in which you can counterattack, or 4 timings in which you can counterattack. He calls these first, before, just and afterwards. And the best way to think about these is that you're hitting someone first, you're hitting someone before, you're hitting someone just or afterwards. First means that they've actually exposed themselves, given you a false time. And you can hit them, you can actually attack first. Before means that they start their attack in a proper time, but you can hit them before they were expecting to hit you. Just means you'll hit them just as they were expecting to hit you, and afterwards means that you will hit them after they finished their attack and it hasn't landed. We'll give you some examples. So Marius came forward, he didn't create a threat, and I was able to attack. My attack actually initiated before his. And then I get out of distance. So in this case, as his arm comes forward, I strike it and fly out, get safely out of distance. In this case, Marius's timing on his attack is perfect. I can't hit his arm early in the action, so I've got to hit it just as he was expecting to hit me. He's missed me because I've moved back out of distance. And finally, if I go back a little too far, I'll have to hit him afterwards. So in this case, his arm was too tightly tucked in, I would have missed it, but I was able to hit his head just after he finished his attack. In Silver, we have several matchups between fights. The first we're going to look at is open to open. The primary response when somebody attacks you in open fight is to slip back and counterattack, although you may parry. When you slip back, you always slip back and left, all right, back and towards the sword side. So whenever somebody attacks you, you can counterattack. We're going to show counterattacks in the timing before and just. So that was a counterattack before. Now we're going to do a counterattack just. And I can do exactly the same thing on the other side. So I'll do a counterattack early in the action before, and I'll do a counterattack late in the action just. One more. So the counterattacks before and just. The trick with these is to make your counterattack go from shoulder to hip. Seems a bit strange to do that rather than to aim directly at the arm, but it makes the attack land. It's got to go, the arm's got to go through that arc. Against a vertical attack to the head, you again slip back and left, and you've got to pick, is the attack coming in a bit more this way or a bit more that way? And you can either attack with a mandrita or a reverso. All right, you've just got to use your judgment as to which is better. Okay, so if Marius attacks me with a range of vertical and near vertical cuts, I'll choose which side to attack him on. Okay, so there's a range of attacks, either downright blows, mandriti, or reverse blows. Now it might occur to you that Marius should be attacking the legs. Silver doesn't mention much about the legs. The very oldest fencing manual in existence says, don't attack the legs, it will be dangerous for your head. If you attack too low, you just expose your head. We've done counterattacks. You can also parry open to open. The great benefit of this is that your opponent will be expecting you to slip back and counterattack. So once in a blue moon, it's good to move forward and parry. So, as you can see, I'm dropping my sword and I'm coming in and I'm parrying. It's really critical here to do that guard transition exactly the way we showed it earlier on. Otherwise you can get yourself into all sorts of trouble. One of the other matchups you can get is open fight against variable fight. Specifically, we're going to use staccato, which I think is the best of the lines of variable fight. If you're attacked with a low attack in variable fight, you're told to move your feet circularly away from the attack and to parry in forehand ward, either inside or outside. Very important when you do this not to cross your heels. So when you're moving to the right, you step circularly with both feet, and moving to the left, we'll swap which foot is forward, not crossing the heels. And finally, we'll do a defence against an attack that's vertical or near vertical, where we simply thrust to the underside of the arm. Wasn't good. And the other side. One more. Again. Now it's very important with this last defence that you move back, because I don't care how good you are, you can't always guarantee to hit a target as small as an arm. So you've got to make sure that you're out of distance, like so. And while we're here, quite by accident, this is why we have guards like this on the front of the sword. All right? So, not a good thing to be Hayden. You know, I come and do all sorts of fun stuff. So that's why you have the little catches on the front of the sword. So if I miss with my thrust, I'm out of distance and I don't get hit. The next matchup we can get is open fight against true guardant fight. And the main response here is to parry, although you can counterattack. Silver says, let your gatherings be always in that fight toward his right side. So shall you with your sword choke up any blow that he can make at you. So what this means is that I've got to move in and towards the sword side, so in and left against a right-hander, and if the attack's coming to my left side, I choke up the blow. If the attack's coming to my right side, I give myself some room to deflect it. I'm going to show you the parries that can be made from true guardant against open fight. We're going to start low on the left and move around the body. If the attack comes in low on the left, I'm going to parry it bastard guardant, remembering that I'm always going to be stepping forward and left. Now it's important, when I fight, I'm going to be moving. So if my weight is more on my back foot, I'll step forward and left. If my weight's more on my front foot, I'll pass forward and left. And it really doesn't matter which you do. Let your feet decide which one wants to move first. So we'll start with the defence against a low attack on the left, a downright blow to the body or a mandrita tondo. If the attack comes in a little higher, I do almost exactly the same thing. Instead of parrying in bastard gardened, I parry in true gardened. If the attack comes from the other side, then I want to step the same way, forward and left, and I want to deflect it. In this case, we're going to swap places because the action's going to occur on the other side. Hi. If he attacks low underneath the level of the elbow, then I parry with the point down and do much the same response. I've got two basic ripostes I can do. I can either turn the point up into his belly or roll the sword around and hit him on the head. Being careful not to turn the head, try not to offer the back of your head to an opponent, and be aware that doing that, people are liable to turn their head away. Be careful not to hit them on the back of their head. In true gardened, your basic response is to parry and riposte, although you can counterattack. Just as in open, your basic response is to counterattack, but you can parry. And what this does is it makes your opponent unsure about what your response is going to be. So in the case of true gardened, you can cut up at the incoming arm, or you can slip back and wait for the opponent's attack to have missed and attack afterwards. So we'll show these ones. Once you've made a parry from true garden fight, one of your options is to grapple with your opponent. Silver calls this taking the grip. Now it's really important when you're taking the grip to realise when you do it and when you don't. The most important thing is that you be able to reach your opponent, because otherwise you're going to give them a false time. I'll demonstrate. Now in this situation, I can't reach Marius's hand without leaning in and giving him a big time in which he can hit me, pull his hand away and hit me. I'm in all sorts of trouble there. So even if I'm a bit closer, I'm still not close enough to grapple. I'd have to be right up here before I'm able to reach his hand and grapple. So that's the first thing. Don't grapple unless you're really close at the end of the parry. So it's really important to make sure that you're close enough in distance when you grapple. The other important thing, and this is for all you really good grapplers out there, don't forget it's a sword fight. The aim of grappling is to immobilise the other person for a fraction of a second, to make them think about their balance, make them think about a joint lock, and to prevent them from using their sword. One of the problems that people get into, particularly if they're good at grappling, is they get all excited and then they don't realise that the other bloke's sword's actually in their belly. So it's a sword fight, not a wrestling match. When we grapple, there are different types of grapple that work depending on how deep we are. Let's start off down this side with parrying in Bastard and True Garden. And one more time. Different people will grapple in different ways. Let me demonstrate. And really low. Now in this situation, I can reach Marius. Now see how this is a straight line, and in order to come under my hilt, that would be a curved line. Some people parry a little bit further out, and that becomes the straight line, and this is a curved line. So whatever happens, at a particular height, that'll be the straight line, and this is the curved line. You always take the straightest line to your opponent's hilt and hand. In this case, I parry in close to my body, so in this case going over his arm is good in this situation, and going under his arm would be the wrong thing to do in this situation. So what can I actually do here? Well, the first thing I can do is just come in and deflect his hand out of the way. I might get my hand inside his hilt, and I can strike. All right, so an example of that at speed. All I need to do is to take his sword away and prevent him from doing something with it for a fraction of a second. I can take a more meaningful lock. I can wrap his hand up with my hand. And then I have the option of disarming him. That's one of the options. A disarm works for me as a victory in a fight. The last option is when we're reaching over the sword hand, is to use what's called an arm bar. Right. Okay. Now, as I've said, for some people, they'll always want to reach under the sword when they make a parry. For everybody, when the hilt's high enough, you'll want to reach under the sword. In that case, again, we can deflect. We can use a circular motion like this to wrap up the wrist, or we can reach right in deep and use that same motion to wrap up the elbow. And one last one. And as you can see in that last one, if you wrap up the elbow, he's pretty much completely at your mercy. Now if the attack comes into the right hand side, we do the parries as before, and we're going to grapple either the elbow or simultaneously the throat and the knee. And it's exactly the same pair of grapples whether you parry high or low. And if you come in low, and you'll notice that that position you're in is that same position we used for that pushing drill earlier. It's a very stable position. So that's it for a few of the basics of silver. What we've seen have been the core principles, we've seen the basic attacks and the basic defences. Now what you haven't seen in this video is silver has ways to break pretty much every one of those defences. So there's a whole nother layer on top that we haven't had time to look at. We also haven't looked at how to deal with left-handers, or indeed how left-handers should fight right-handers. And mostly it's just swapping one side to the other, but there are a few peculiarities. One thing that we will leave you with, how to respond to a successful defence. Silver continually says you should strike and fly out. Now, I'm going to show you what happens. I'm going to attack Marius and he's going to try to hit me. Firstly, I won't strike, I won't fly out. I'll come in and I'll attack and I won't retreat. And then I'll retreat and you'll be able to judge the difference. So as you can see, even if a successful parry is made against you, if you then fly out, you have a lot better chance of being able to parry that and keep the fight going. So strike and fly out. I've looked at silver for close to 25 years now. I think it's a brilliant system. It's in tune with the way your body works. It works very naturally. People can pick it up quite quickly. It's also a system where you can fight very vigorously with a minimum amount of kit on, and I think very close to how silver wanted the fight to look. So hopefully you end up with the same amount of enthusiasm that I have for silver. I think it's a brilliant system of fight and I'd love to see you doing it as well as all my students do. Thank you. That's a good example of flying out. Oh. supposed to be tied. Nice. Yep. Oh, yes.
Ooh.
A little hard, a little hard.
Sorry. I wanted to call it, I've had to fall over.
That heat.
Oh, sorry mate, look at your elbow.
Yeah. You're allowed to make some attacks too, Lewis.
Oh, yes.
Oh. Nice. Nice back. Oh, yes. Good distance. Oh. Well done. Nice one.
Really? Oh, nice. Oh, yep, that got through. Oh yes, nice. Nice distance. Oh yes. Nice after. One more. Thank you.